Hey everyone, Siobhan Nicolau here, giving you some insight on chapter 3 from my first book, The Absence of Evil Love's Reclamation of the Soul. The title of this chapter is A Rock Feels No Pain. And so uh, that was actually a Simon and Garfunkel song, comes from a Simon and Garfunkel song because a rock feels no pain and an island never cries. Now, being way too sensitive for my environment and being uh, assaulted, physically and mentally and emotionally, um, all the time, it became somewhat of something I just expected all the time. We have those old 8 millimeter film reels, and I've seen the footage where my sister would come and blindside me out of nowhere. Now, my sister Stefania had problems. Nobody really realized that's what it was. She was just called the bully of the family. She was really violent, and she would just out of nowhere come and hit me or something like that. And my parents just let it go. That's just what it was. It looked like there were so many kids in our family when our emotions would run high and go just berserk. We would get into a fight amongst each other, and mom would say, "Don't get blood on the carpet," and dad say, "Take it outside." And before you know it, it's like the gangs in New York. We've got so and so in the ring, and the neighborhood's standing around, and everybody's cheering everybody on. It was absolutely bizarre. It's really unbelievable. So we got into a few fist fights and things. We learned how to fight at home. It was all about survival, and it was just wild. There were some really great times within this time period, from the time I was in fourth grade until I went into high school at age 12. But during this time, like, I had a sister who we had karmic stuff together. She almost literally killed me once, and she went off on people, and nothing was really done about it. So it was just something that we all dealt with in different ways. And she just had it in for me real bad. So I was dealing with that a lot, and was dealing with how I felt about everything because I still couldn't really express it. I'm like 7 years old and 8 years old, and me, I think my mind didn't even click in till about 9 to even be able to identify, because my life kept moving so quickly. I didn't even have time to think. It's just being fast on your feet, right? So I used to chew my fingernails actually down to blood because it comforted me. And it was because my emotions were shredded. Literally, I did not know how to deal with the energy that was becoming increasingly intense in my environment. Catholic school at the time, the reflections were back and forth from home there as well. It's like I had no reprieve. My mother would not listen to me when I begged her not to make me go to that school anymore. It was just not, there was going nowhere with that. But I tried anyway. I asked her if she'd take me out of that school. During that time, I was so grateful. I look back on that little place we lived because there was so much going on in the street below. Now, it's right above Sutter Street in one of the big old houses on Figueroa Street. And Sutter Street is an old Wild West town. So they had some really cool things going on there. I mean, these were the days when the saloons were real. And this place was like a turn back the clock into time. They had artists that I loved, and I befriended the two of the main artists on that street, one of whom became my art teacher, and the other I modeled for his painting classes. Um, but I talk about how I can remember the smell of the linseed oil in the canvas, and how I loved going down there and watching this man. Spence Billington was his name. He's long since gone, but I did take a watercolor class from him when I was an adult, many years later. But just my artist self was able to come out during this time because I had access to things that were of value to me, like art and learning new things and nature and just meeting people who had interesting stories. And so it was wonderful in that regard. But I also realized, and this is when I was like 7, 8 years old, when I was taking these art classes from Carol Mathis, um, that if I was happy and I went home, that I would just be shut down. So I learned how not to be in my joy in order to stay invisible, in order to keep under the wire so nobody would pay that much attention to me and I would hold it inside of myself. Now, it's really good to be able to feel your joy without anybody feeding the fuel of it inwardly. And I think few people do that if they don't have this experience. Like they're always looking for the outside world to reinforce or to validate their ability to feel joy, but it is nice to share enthusiasm, like someone would really be happy for you rather than be jealous and resentful, like my mother and my sisters always were and still are. So when I remember very distinctly walking up to the house after having gone to an art class, feeling so incredibly inspired and putting my hand on the doorknob and shutting myself down before I walked through the door. I would literally snuff my own light out so I wouldn't be punished. It was always like I had this feeling I was going to be punished if my light was shining. Now, this is a pattern that fast forward all the way to 60 years old, and I'm, just learning now about that pattern and how it's affected me in my whole life. And so it's incredible, the story. If you have the courage to write the story of your past, even if you don't publish it, you'll find some amazing nuggets in there that can be applied today to what residual energy is of the patterns that you've been holding since your childhood still are reenacting themselves. It's absolutely incredible. So I had a lot of beauty at those times just because it was so simple. There weren't any sidewalks. We had these beautiful Victorian mansions that were still in a neighborhood and the old flowers that were still there. And I remember the smell and all of these wonderful things. So that was a great time for me. It was also very brutal because we moved about 18 months or 2 years, not even 2 years in that house. And we moved across the river to a town that seemed like we moved to the middle of Missouri. There was nothing there. There was no culture, too far for mom to drive, too many kids. I had to give up art classes. I had to give up the things that were important to me. We lived in a vibrant little neighborhood because there was so much going on in that little street. You could go down and go to the penny candy store, the old soda parlor that had been there since the 1800s, and the onyx that it was made of, and all of the original hardware. I mean, just beautiful stuff. And I really, really enjoyed it, but there was none of that when we moved, and that's when things really got rough. We were still going to the same Catholic school. My sisters were getting older. My older sister, Stefania, the one who almost killed me, was getting more and more violent. Things were becoming more divided within her. They were becoming more divided within each of us as things became more intense, and it became denying how we felt and didn't have any way to deal with it anyway, and surviving our life. And so when I was 9, after we had moved out of this wonderful place, I stood in the field. I got tired of it. I got tired of being a victim. I got tired of chewing my nails to blood because my emotions were shredded and I didn't know how to deal with the energy anymore. I was literally freaking out. I was just turning it in on myself and didn't know how to soothe myself. So I befriended the Marlboro Man, and we were great friends for 14 years. And that helped me stop chewing my nails and gave me a sense of comfort. But before I found cigarettes a couple years later, when I was about 11, I took my hand. I remember standing in the field and I said, I am a rock and I am an island, because a rock feels no pain and an island never cries. That was a Simon and Garfunkel song. And I listened to the words to that and I armored myself with them. And I became a little badass. I was tired of getting my ass kicked, and that was it. So I just flipped that switch and said, no more. So I flipped the power struggle and, the power dynamic, and just wasn't going to deal with that anymore. I still stayed under the wire, and it wasn't my nature to fight back. And you can get taken advantage of if people think you're weak. And that was like the sicker chicken theory I think we used to laugh about, but it was absolutely true. And, so this is the beginning of me shielding myself, and then I literally got in trouble for that. I just went off completely on the other side. And, had some experiences that really taught me a thing or two about how negative emotion, when it is compressed and unchecked and something triggers you, how you can be so out of control with that energy that it can really hurt others. And you can see that on the news and you cannot understand what's really going on. You just think these people are absolutely crazy. Well, let me tell you something. In my second book, I'm writing about mental illness and negative emotion, and I firmly believe that most mental illness, especially the violent acts, are all a result of that. It's all negative emotion. It's negative emotion creates the mental illness, whether it creates the shift in the chemicals that alter the brain. I think it does that. I'm not a scientist, nor am I a doctor, but I'll bet you they'll find that. I'd like them to prove me wrong. But negative emotion is the source of all war, the source of all violence, the source of all problems in this world. It's the source of all conflict, and it begins and ends within you. And so as I observed myself in this place for a split second, I vowed at the time I would never allow myself to be out of control like that again. And so I stepped up to another level of myself that absolutely sealed off myself from my emotions. And I did it impeccably. I didn't act out anymore like that. I didn't get angry and I didn't let it fly free. I put a lid on it so tight that I felt nothing afterward. I channeled that energy into many other things as I got older. So through this time period, from grade 4 and like age 7, 8, 9, this was the time I was really getting tired of all these things and changed my mind to make a change. Lots of things were changing in the family. My mom made a decision that altered our whole existence from that point on. I found myself going into high school again when I was 12, turning 13, but still extremely young to be in high school, just because I was so slight. Like I was like 4'9" and 72 pounds. I wasn't a big girl. And here I am among these high school kids. And I learned a lot about different ways of living, but I really wasn't interested in school. So high school didn't really do it for me. I would rather be doing other things like, hitchhiking up to the American River in the foothills and sunbathing all day and running around. It was beautiful in those days. So it was really a great place to be. It gave me a lot of peace to be out in nature, and it was really accessible in those times, and it was also safe. So we had fun. But the only subjects I was ever interested in was marine biology and also an English class, and that was about it. There was really nothing anybody could have done for me because I had no guidance at home. I had absolutely no one that cared about whether I went to college, no one who bothered to know me well enough to see what I would be best at and foster that within me. It was just I had my basic needs met and I was left to my own device. So that's the way it was. And it served me well to be able to survive. Again, there's that word. But when you survive, you're not living. You don't trust in anything. You get very good at playing the games of the world. You get really good at seeing how the mind games are played, how people stay safe in observing the environments that you're in. I was in some pretty interesting environments beyond my family when I left home at 14 years old. And you'll read about that in my 4th chapter, which is called The Principles of Lust. So that's it for chapter 3, just this whole block of time where there was a lot of change from the artist part of myself that I found and until the mind started to really sink in. And then I started to identify how I felt, and identifying how you feel or not can trigger it depending upon the environment you're in. And you have these experiences of how it plays through you or how you act it out. And there was a lot of acting out during this time in my life. So there we go. See ya, chapter 4.